A few days after the announcement, I listened to my aunties carefully, keeping my head bowed in a respectful manner. I heard them tell me what a good family the Winds were, how lucky I was. Old Aunt said my in laws accepted me, in spite of my mother's bad background. They told me that the Winds ran a successful overseas business, that Win Fu could help my father and uncle sell our family's silks and cottons in foreign countries. He had already promised this. And they said that Win Fu's mother was very talented, a seamstress and a landscape painter, a good cook, and an efficient manager of the house. She could teach me lots of things. And the house itself, of course, it was not as good as ours, but it was a very fine house with plenty of servants. They even had an automobile. The more I heard, the more I wanted to believe them. I imagined Winfu driving up in the automobile to take me away, and I would be so glad to leave my old life. I dreamt of living in a happy household where nobody ever complained. I was thinking of a mother-in-law who was too good to be true, who praised me, never scolded me. I could already see servants filling my teacup before I even knew I had thirst, and running through my mind were the many children, all the same size, chasing my skirt, one after another, making me laugh. When my aunties told me I was marrying Wen Fu, that's what I imagined. What the fortune teller had told Peanut. Of course, with all these good things about to be mine, I felt sorry for Peanut. But then she began to accuse me, told me I had betrayed her. During the time before the wedding, we still had to share the same bed. When I walked into our room, she spit on the floor. At night, she kicked my legs, pushed me, and made my quilt fall off to the side, and whispered that I was worse than worms that ate a dead animal. You hurt your mother, I protested. I am the oldest. I have to marry first. I have to obey. If you want to change this, you argue with your mother. If I had thought about it more carefully, I would have realized my aunties did not care if I was the oldest, Peanut the youngest. Peanut was the favorite. Everything they gave to Peanut was always better. Better clothes, better praise, more spending money, better charms for attracting good luck, more remedies when she became sick. As I have already said, they did not mistreat me. They just treated Peanut better. So why was I so stupid? I should have known. If they were giving me to Winfu's family, then maybe it was not such a good deal. Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, and the Well-Rounded Nerd. It is the week of Thanksgiving, and I thought it would be appropriate. I mean, I'm not much for doing specials, since my content is me on this channel. But since I do like to read stories that I love and read authors that have made an impact, I thought for this week I might do a story that has had an impact on me for many years since I was a teenager. And it's a story that makes me thankful. That's why I'm diving into The Kitchen God's Wife by Amy Tan, the greatest of all time. She is actually the author that got me interested in literature by women who were from different parts of Asia, primarily China, but some Korean authors, some Japanese authors, and there's even a Thai author I got introduced to. So the reason I like these stories and I like to dive into these stories is because they are raw stories of what happens when society decides a portion of that society has less value. Even though that portion of society has an impact, value is diminished for a multitude of reasons. But before I get into the story and read the remainder of this chapter that I'm in, I want to preface when we talk about other cultures and being thankful for what we have, that is never a judgment call on another culture. Every one of us is a product of the society we were born into, the time we were fortunate enough to be born into, and the social status that came with whatever factors are in our family. Could be economic, could be location, religion, ethnicity, all of those things, working class, servant class. I mean, there are still a couple of countries in the world that operate on the caste system. We don't judge cultures that aren't our own. What I do love is to learn from them and to be thankful that as a woman, I was born at a time and a place where even if others don't see my value, I have enough free agency to understand my own value and worth and make my own way in the world. And I think that's why I love these stories so much, is because they are good, deep reminders that for the luck of time and fertility, my life could have been completely different. So, spoilers for a piece of classic English literature. When was it published? I had a habit when I was younger of tearing the pages off of the front page of all my paperback books to identify them as mine because nobody wanted an ugly book. It didn't change what was on the inside, but I don't do that anymore. I actually had to repurchase this one at a used bookstore, and it was only 50 cents. How dare you? Because I had, in one of my moves, I lost my copy. And then I refound it, so now I have two copies. I think I ended up giving a copy away to someone. What year did this come out? I have totally forgotten. Because I was young when I first read it. And I don't feel like getting on the internet. Random House, USA. Where is the date? Sometime in the 90s is when this came out. But anyhow, I'll find it later. That's not the point of this this video. But when you read this story, so again, spoilers for a 35, 40-year-old book here. 1991, found it. 30-year-old book. Something you got to remember. This is written from the perspective of a woman who lived through the Communist Revolution in China, and her family did not value her. Her mother was what was called double second, which was a very bad term. So pre-Communist Revolution China is very different from the China that we know today. That's not a country I've been to. There are places in China I would love to see. I would love to see the Forbidden City, particularly, and a couple of other historic sites. I don't know if that'll ever happen in my lifetime, but everything I know of China is from meeting people and reading. So let me be really clear about that. But one of the things we have to consider is when we say it was a different world to what it is now, Chinese culture, the cultures of North Africa and Asia are the oldest civilizations on Earth. They are the foundation of humanity. So in the Mediterranean areas, in North Africa, that part of Asia that starts reaching in to Europe, the Eurasian area, that's where humans spread from. So when we look at the African and Asian cultures, they it is beyond ethnicity. What is happening in a lot of those cultures? We're talking about societal structures, beliefs, systems that are thousands upon thousands of years old. The longest continual, like, linear dynasty of humans in the ruling class, I think, to ever have existed was the Chinese ruling family, like that line of emperors, that the longest straight line in one family to ever be in humans. The Forbidden City is the largest private palace to have ever been constructed on Earth, and it took a lot to construct. And we got to remember that the Forbidden City is the second imperial palace. They moved the capital of China and built a new palace. Like, it's a whole thing. That's for another video, another time, another day. Um, but the cultures of China and those parts of Asia are so rich in history that a way of being is just in the blood. You are born with it. A lot of African cultures that are very old are that way too. You are just born into it. And it's kind of hard for those of us who are from more melting pot type cultures to think of culture in that way, because I grew up in a place where my culture is a culmination of many other influences. But you have to think, hundreds of years ago, even, I mean, reaching back thousands is one thing, but even a few hundred years ago, there wasn't a lot of outside influence to be had. So the way a society was set up, the way it operated wasn't entrenched is not the word. It was foundational. It was tattooed on everyone's souls. And that is the culture that this young lady is born into. Still very Confucian. There is a certain structure to the household. Of course, the husband, who hopefully is a first son of a first son, is at the top. Then followed by his sons, his fathers. The only person that a first son would ever have to really pay homage to is his own mother. Um, but she gets no status really until she produces a son, and then her son marries and has a son. It's a whole thing. I've studied Confucianism a couple of times, and it makes sense, like, for the first 4 pages, and it's like, oh, that's a lot of layers. It's layers, but it's a very layered society. And the way that Confucianism and a couple of other philosophical and religious ideologies were able to take hold in China is because before China was China, it was disparate warring clans, and then they were brought together. But then things were still kind of unruly. The first couple of emperors were pretty smart in that they were like, you know what, we need to establish an order of society, and that's where Confucian society was born. And it lasted. It lasted. Whether one agrees or disagrees with the chosen places in society or assigned places in society, they existed. I said all that to say they existed. So we don't make judgments on that, because that is what this central character is born into. She's born into a world where her mother is called a double second. And there's a lot of play about that term and what it means. When I first read this book when I was younger, so this came out in 91, 92. I read this book, I want to say I first read it when I was about 14-ish years old, because the movie had come out, I think. So I was 13 or 14, somewhere in there. I think. I cannot remember exactly when the movie came out. But the movie made me want to read the book. And I'm pretty sure at the school I was going to, we ended up reading the book because the major motion picture was being made. That was the catalyst for that. I went to private school, so we read everything. And it was such a story. The movie's good, but movies are limited amounts of time. You have all the pages in a book, but in a movie, it can't go on forever. I mean, it could, I'd pay, but there's a limit, and a few things are changed. You got to read the book, because when I was younger and I was trying to understand why this double second thing was so bad, I did not understand. read that part over and over and over, and it was actually on a test, and that's why I focus in on it so much. Why is it so bad that her mother was a double second? Well, in Confucian society, um, women are at the low end of the totem pole. Like property has more value than the women, and the women are property. Women are a man's possessions in Confucian society. Not judging, just simply is. Um, and because of that, they're replaceable. So Winnie, our main character, her name is Winnie in America. That's not her Chinese name. But Winnie, when her mother is married to her biological father, it was because his wife had passed, and he was supposed to make this pretty young thing his new first wife. But not only had he married her second, but he made her second wife and made someone else first wife. So she was a double second wife. So she's double worthless. That's what double second means. I did not understand that because we don't have polygamy in most of modern American culture. That's not a thing. You know, the ideal is, one dude, one girl. That is the way our society's set up. And polygamy or polygyny in some cultures, typically in patriarchal societies, a man is allowed to have, a wife and other wives, or some cultures it's wives and concubines. And the difference between a wife and a concubine, honestly, is status and treatment. Like the emperors of China had stables full of women. Yeah, I said stables. King Solomon did. He hanging out there in the Old Testament, but he had many. I think they said he had 1,000 wives and 1,000 concubines. You think all of those women ever had a presence with him? He may have been the wisest of us all, but he was dumb in one area. You put 2,000 women in one place and you thought things were gonna be smooth. Okay, I thought you were wise, Solomon. We can't share a bathroom, and you had 2,000 of them anyway. I don't worry. Like no joke. Like sidebar. Like my dog is a senior dog, and he's my baby. He's my boy, and he's a he. And next year we're probably going to get a second dog because I'm probably not going to want another dog if this one kicks off. They got to exist at the same time. Because he's my boy. But I'm real clear that next dog has to be a boy. I ain't sharing a house with a girl. Not doing it. I'm the only girl in this house, and I like it that way. 1,000 wives and 1,000 concubines. That is insane. Insane. But in Confucian society, a man, if he was proven worthy, could have more than one wife and as many concubines as he could pay for. And they remained his wives and or concubines at his whim. Period. That's it. Just as long as they were in his good graces and pleasure, they were provided for, maybe. But once upon a time, there was no such thing as DV. There was no such thing as a domestic. There was no such thing as, calling somebody because your husband did awful to you. That didn't exist, especially in this kind of world. So when he is born into a world where not only is she a girl, because boys are them. That's it, because I never understood that. Like, I'm not judging, but just the logic of it all. Like, who's your son going to marry to have a boy with, if there are no girls? And there's a lot of societies now that are paying for that. That's not unique to Chinese culture. There's a lot of cultures out there that wanted boys, and they borderline have bred girls out. So there are countdown clocks on certain ethnicities on this planet because they can't produce fast enough to exist for another couple hundred years. That's kind of scary. Long-term consequences. But she's already born a girl, so she was already not valuable. And her father wasn't mean. Okay. It's a relative term, but he wasn't the worst to them. I mean, she says it herself, they didn't treat me bad, they just treated someone else better. Because girls were already going to get treated bad because they were girls. But that was the standard of the society. So not only is she the daughter of a double second, she has the nerve to be a daughter. And then they arrange a marriage for her. And this is right before the Communist Revolution, just a few years before. So right before the Communist Revolution, the people of a certain class, they were living a good life. She is born into a wealthy family, at least. But wealthy families, even their daughters, they try to connect them to other decent families because it's all about continuing to build those familial ties so that everyone's business gets larger, everyone's reach gets larger, more power, more this, more that. And the man they marry her to, you need to read the book. I can't even describe how awful he is. I don't have time. Wen Fu, he the worst. And the reason Winnie's cousin Peanut is so scandalized by Winnie getting engaged to him is because she liked him first. They actually had a little flirtation going on. Um, but her family said no. Her own mother was like, no, you're not marrying him. In fact, your cousin's going to marry him, the double second's daughter, which should have been a clue that he wasn't that great a guy because she was not a valuable member of the household. Why would they give her to a man of value? Her entire fate was beyond her control. She had no say in the matter. Her mother was, at this point in the story, deceased. Her father doesn't seem to give two craps about her. May just want her gone because she's a disgrace to just be lingering around, probably with her mother's ghost, hanging on to her coattails. That's what she's born into. But the reason I do love this and why I encourage everyone, especially women, to read this book is these aren't just stories of, oh, woe is me. Something bad happened. I have a past. It's about women who still triumph. Triumph doesn't mean, oh, they made all the money or, oh, they achieved all the material success or got the best looking husband. No, that's not what it means. It means that they lived. They lived. Even though life and fate gave them unlucky circumstances, they chose to live. They chose to thrive. And that's why stories like this make me thankful. It reminds me that no matter what happens to us, because everyone has a past. You have a past. I have a past. We all have circumstances. But we do not have to let those things define us permanently. When you get to that stage in life where you have autonomy and free agency, you can control your destiny. Take control. Be like Winnie. But I thought it would be important this week of Thanksgiving just to think of stories that make us thankful. Because life could have been so different, but for time. Could have been different. If I had been born a girl into one of those societies where girls weren't it, they'd have gotten rid of me in the first 10 years because my mouth kept me in trouble. Could not have been born a slave. Would not have been above putting strychnine in the well. Wouldn't have been above it. So God knew when I needed to exist on this planet. It was right now in America. Because any other time period, I'd have been in a history book for like bad reasons. If you've not read, this is I know it's not old enough now to be considered a classic, but it's a modern classic of English literature, of women's stories, historical fiction that just brings us closer to humans as humans. And reading these very human stories, it doesn't just make me thankful for my life. It makes me thankful that I got to be human. Because being human means having the ability to make life better and different, and not just for myself, but for others, which our character eventually does do. But I'm not going to read this entire book today. We're just going to pick up on the story of her engagement to finish out. And then something happened that made me think all these good things would go away. My aunties said they were taking me to Shanghai to see my father, to ask his permission for my marriage. They showed me his letter telling us when he would come, only that no words of congratulations. Back then, we had no telephone lines connecting Shanghai to the island, and this letter had come by messenger, not the regular mail service. So the letter I held in my hand seemed very serious. Imagine, with your heart, how I felt. I had not seen my father for almost 12 years, ever since he sent me to the island. My aunties had never taken me to see him all those times we visited Shanghai. He had never written to me, had never come to see me on the island or at any boarding school. So I did not know whether he would be mad or happy to see me. I did not know whether I should be fearful or happy to see him. That morning, old aunt, new aunt, and I took our baths early. We put on our best clothes, bright silk dresses and jackets. We bought first-class tickets for the 2-hour motorboat ride down the river to the Shanghai harbor. When we got off the boat, a long black automobile with a driver was already outside the gate, waiting to take us to my father's house on Julu Road. Everything was like a happy fairy tale. But as we walked up the pathway to the house, I knew we had made a terrible mistake. Our clothes were too bright, too showy, letting everyone know how unimportant we were. And then the door opened, and I was standing in the big hallway of a house I had once lived in, but could not remember. The house was 10 times bigger and better than our place at the mouth of the river. Or maybe you could not even compare it in that way. It was the kind of place where everything you saw you wanted to touch, yet you were afraid to move one step in case you knocked something down. Next to me were 2 tall, ornate stands that held small white statues, one of a hunter chasing a deer, another with 2 girls walking in English dresses. One sneeze, one cough, one word said too loud, and surely you would break those statues. I was looking at my feet, wishing I could stoop down and wipe the dust off my new shoes. That's how I came to stare at the white marble floor. I suddenly remembered the pattern running through it. My mother once told me they were jewels left by a river flowing over the marble rock. And in front of me, on the surface of the floor, different colored lights were dancing. The shadows of colorful fish from the same river, my mother had said. And then I looked up to see where the colored lights came from. The big stained glass window at the top of the first stair landing. The flowers, trees, and sky in the glass. And as I struggled to remember that as well, I saw the wide spiral staircase. Tried to recall the smooth dark wood along the banister, the feel running through my hands. And that's when I saw my father walking down the stairs, one step at a time, looking like a god descending from heaven. I remembered that manner of his as if he was never in a hurry. I remembered that feeling of always waiting, of always feeling scared, not knowing what would happen next. But now he was standing on the bottom step, staring at me, no color in his face. And I'm sure I looked the same way. It was like one ghost staring at another. Oh, perhaps he was seeing my mother in my face and hated me. I bowed my head. "Daughter," he said suddenly, "you should invite our guests to sit down." I turned to the side to see if he was speaking to someone else in the room, but old aunt nudged me, and I found myself pointing to a sitting room to my right. "Please sit down. Come in and sit. Don't be polite. Sit." as if I had always welcomed my aunties to a house I did not live in. We were all sitting very quietly on sofas with feather cushions that sank down low and made me feel stuck. Old Aunt was nodding nervously toward my father. "How are you, big brother? Good health, I hope?" New Aunt repeated the same thing. "How are you? How are you?" My father smiled slowly, crossed his legs, and then said, "Not bad, although not the best. You know how it is when your bones grow a little older." "Aye, this is true." Old Aunt burst in right away. "It is the same way with me. I have stomach pains all the time right after dinner. In here in my bowels." One of my father's eyebrows shot up, and everyone fell silent again. The gong of a clock sounded in another room, and my aunts pretended to listen with great delight, then agreed that this was the most beautiful noise they had ever heard. I was quiet. Sitting there, I saw that my father looked like an older, thinner image of Uncle. His face was more stern, also more intelligent looking. He wore glasses with round gold rims, a dark western suit with a Chinese vest underneath. He was not very tall, although he had that air of a large man, the way he slowly turned his head halfway back toward a servant, then slowly waved the servant forward with his hand. But instead of telling the servant something, he turned to me. "Daughter, you decide. Should we have Chinese snacks or English biscuits with our tea?" My mind felt like two horses running off in opposite directions. Which one? Which was the correct answer? "Something simple," I finally whispered. And he smiled. "Of course, that's what you always prefer." He waved his hand once again to the servant, told him to bring English biscuits, Chinese pears, and Belgian chocolates. I thought about what he did. His manners were so elegant, very strange to me. Yet he seemed to know me. If I had truly spoken my desires, that's what I would have said. All of those things. Over tea, which did not last too long, Old Aunt told my father all about the Wynn family, how they were the best match for his daughter, a good ally for his family business. I stared at my hands folded in my lap, glancing up every now and then to see my father's reaction. And we all listened as Old Aunt took a little piece of truth and stretched it in all directions. The Wynn family's export business became an international shipping company. Wen Fu's knowledge of overseas business became handshake friendships with the presidents of most important companies in England and America. And the Wynn family, mother, now had talents so great, well, hearing Old Aunt, you would think she could charm a winter tree into growing back its leaves overnight. My father was not a stupid man. He listened quietly, sipping his tea, and every time Old Aunt exaggerated too much, he stared at her without saying anything. No expression on his face, until she became flustered and moved her estimate of the Wynn family down just slightly. Oh, naturally, their business is not as successful by the same standards as yours, not nearly as high as your position. but they are very comfortable and very, very respected. That is the most important thing for your daughter. I was thinking a respected family. And now old aunt had exhausted herself with good things to boast about the Wynn family. Still, my father did not say anything. A good boy, a respected family, new aunt said to fill the quiet. My father was looking at me. I was confused and tried not to show this. Perhaps he was against the marriage. Maybe he was still angry with my mother. Angry with me. I know this family, he said at last. I have already had some people look into their business to find out about their background. He waved his hand back as if chasing away a mosquito. But it is good to hear what my own family has to say as well. This news startled old aunt and new aunt. They looked like two thieves caught stealing beans. They hung their heads down, guilty, waiting to hear what my father would say next. What he already knew. Daughter, what do you think? His voice was low, almost hoarse. Is this what you want? I bit my lips. I pinched my fingers. I plucked at my dress, trying to think how I should answer. My father waved his hand again. This is what she wants? He said to my aunties, then sighed. How can we stop her? My aunties both laughed a little, as if this were a joke. But I heard something different. That tone in his voice sounded. He sounded sad. Before I could think about this anymore, my father started asking questions about business matters, so perhaps I was mistaken. How big a gift is the Wynn family offering? Old aunt handed over the envelope. My father quickly counted 4,000 won, then nodded. I was relieved. This was a large sum, a respectable amount, the same as $2,000 in US money, maybe worth 40 or 50,000 today. A middle-class Chinese person would have to work more than 10 years to earn that sum of money. But it did not mean the Wynn family was really giving my father that money. He was supposed to hand back the money on my wedding day, give it to the Wynn family, saying, You are sharing a lifetime of your family's wealth with my daughter. That is already enough. And my father then was expected to give me a money dowry that was the same size as their gift, telling me, This is some extra money so you are not too much of a burden to your new family. And that money would be mine, put into a bank account under my name. I didn't have to share it. No one could take it away from me. But it would be the only money I would have for my entire lifetime. How big a dowry does the Wynn family expect? My father asked next. And here he was referring to things beyond the money dowry. Old aunt had to be very careful how she answered. If she said the Wynns did not want very much, it would appear they were not a family worthy of joining. If she said they wanted a lot, it would sound as if I were not worthy of them. But old aunt had already had experience marrying off her two daughters, so she simply said, The furnishings for her and her new husband's room, meaning the room we would have in the Wynn family house. That kind of answer did not make the winds sound greedy. That kind of answer was like a turn in a poker game. It was now up to my father to show how extra generous he could be. Of course, added old aunt, the husband's family will buy the bed. And here she was referring to old custom, because all generations of sons always had to come from the husband's bed. More tea? My father asked. And because he had asked rather than ordered the servant to pour the tea right away, that was our sign the visit was over. My aunties and I jumped up quickly. No, no, we must go, old aunt said. So soon? My father said. We're already late, said new aunt, which was not true. We had nowhere else to go at that hour of the afternoon. Our boat would not leave until the evening. We started to walk out of the room. But then I heard my father call to me. He did not say daughter. He called me by my name. Wei he said. Say goodbye to your aunties, and then come to my study so that we can talk about your dowry. What small hopes I had carried to my father's house that afternoon, and now what great wishes wanted to leap from my throat with a shout. He was treating me as if I was truly a daughter. All those years in between completely forgotten. Of course, he did not hug me and kiss me, not the way you Americans do when you have been reunited after 5 minutes of separation. We did not even talk very long after my aunties left. But what little he did tell me has made me wonder, even to this day. Did he truly think he was sending me to a good marriage? Or was he finding an easy way to be rid of me forever? This reminder of his own unhappy marriage. And so I have remembered clearly his few words spoken to me that afternoon. I do not think I changed them in my mind to make the meaning of his words go the way I wanted. His face was solemn, his expression frank. He spoke of no apologies for what had passed as 12 years' separation. Now that you are getting married, he said, you will learn your true position in life. And then he pointed to an old-style painting that stretched from one end of the wall to the other. It showed 100 different people, men, women, children, and they were doing 100 different things, working, eating, sleeping, all brief moments in life captured forever. When you were a small child, my father said, you would come into this room and look at this painting over and over again. Do you remember it? I stared at the painting for a very long time, hoping to recognize it. And at last I remembered a small figure in the corner. It was a lady looking over a balcony. I nodded. When I asked you if you liked the painting, you told me it was a very bad painting. Do you remember? I could not imagine myself saying such a thing to my father, even as a young child. I'm sorry. I do not remember this, I said. I am even more sorry that what you remember is a disobedient child. You said the painting was very confusing. You could not tell if the lady playing the lute was singing or happy or a sad song. You could not tell if the woman carrying a heavy load was beginning her journey or ending it. And this woman on the balcony. You said one moment she looked as though she was waiting with hope, and the next moment with fear. I covered my mouth and laughed. What a strange child I was, I said. My father continued talking as if he had not heard me. I liked this in you. So unafraid to say what you thought. And now, he looked at me. His face looked empty of any thoughts and feelings. So, tell me, what do you think of this painting now? He said. My mind ran fast trying to think of the answer, one that would please him, that would show him I had not changed in my honesty. This part I like very much, I said, nervously pointing to a man pleading before a magistrate. The proportions are good, the details are very fine, and this part of the painting I don't like at all. You see, it's too dark, heavy at the bottom, and the features are too flat. My father walked away. He was nodding, although I did not think he was agreeing with me. He turned around to face me. From now on, he said at last with his stern look, you must consider what your husband's opinions are. Yours do not matter so much anymore. Do you understand? I nodded eagerly, grateful that my father had taught me this useful lesson in such a subtle way. And then he said I would stay in his house for the next week so I could shop for my dowry. Do you know what you need? I looked down, still shy. Something simple. Of course, he said. Always something simple. He smiled, and I was happy I had said just the right thought. But then his smile was gone. Just like your mother, he said. Always wanting something simple. And then his eyes grew small, as if he were still seeing her in some distant place, always wanting something else. He said. He looked at me sharply. Are you the same way? His meaning. It was like that painting, changing at each moment. And I was like the lady in the balcony, waiting with hope, waiting with fear, my heart swelling and shrinking with every word, so that in the end I did not know how to answer him. I said only what flew out of my mouth, honest and true. The same, I said. That afternoon a servant showed me to my room. I once shared it with my mother, then left me so I could rest up before the evening meal. As soon as the door closed, I inspected and touched everything. The quilts were different. The paintings and curtains she had chosen were no longer there. Her clothes, her brush, her comb, the lavender soap, all her smells nowhere to be found. But the furniture was the same. The bed, the tall dresser, the stool and vanity table, the mirror that had once held her face. I cried, so happy to return at last. And then I cried a different way, just like a little child again, wondering when my mother would come back. I found out later, no one wanted that had once belonged to my mother. It was considered a bad luck room, and so no one had used that room in all those years. Even though the house was filled with many people, Sanma and Uma still lived there. You remember them, my father's other wives. Sima had already died a few years back, and my father's sons, now with wives and children of their own, they lived there as well. So did the servants and their children. Altogether, the house contained maybe 25 or 30 people. But even with that many people, the house seemed very quiet. When I went downstairs for the evening meal, people were talking in quiet voices, and they greeted me politely enough, and of course no one mentioned the reason for my absence for so many years. I think they didn't know how to treat me. And then food began to arrive on the table. I started to sit next to half-brother's wife, but my father motioned that I should sit next to him. Everyone turned to watch me. My father stood up and announced, "My daughter, Jiang Wei Li, is to be married in 1 month." And then we waited, and waited, and waited, as the servant slowly poured a special drink into a small jade cup the size of thimbles. Finally, my father spoke again, a simple toast in my honor. "In your marriage, may you find all that you wish. Ganbai, bottoms up." He tipped his head back and emptied his cup with a quick swallow. We all followed, and soon I found everyone congratulating me, talking loudly in the manner of a happy family. My tongue burned from the liquor. My eyes burned with tears of joy. That was a long one today, but totally worth it. It's an amazing book. You need to read it. So much happens in Winnie's Wei Li's life. But during this time when, at least in my country, in America, when we're supposed to be remembering about what makes us thankful, you have a family that loves you, be thankful. You have people that are honest with you, be thankful. If you have loved ones you can pull close and hug and tell them you love them, be thankful. And even if terrible things have happened that you can't control, you are breathing today, which means you have another chance and opportunity. So even for that, be thankful. It's important to read books like this because it reminds us that no matter how hard things get, and even if everyone in our lives closest to us betrays us, as long as I wake up on this side of the dirt, I have another chance to make the life that I want. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.